Hello fun people, I'm Isaac Carlson, and now that we know Boba Fett survived his encounter with the Sarlacc, I'm excited to go back through Star Wars Legends to discover how he was originally said to have escaped the monster. Originally, Boba Fett had been able to fight his way out of his death within the Sarlacc due to his ferocity, his Beskar armor, and a determination to be free, which led to the monster releasing him from its mouth. Though that would not be the last time you'd enter and battle the beast. You see, after he flew out, Boba Fett crashed, became unconscious, and was left without his memory. To profit off the wreckage of Jabba's sail barge being destroyed, a group of Jawas arrived and saw the bounty hunter who they mistook as a droid, so they brought him on board their sandcrawler. As the Jawas continued to aggressively search for more droids, they also stole R2-D2, which led Han Solo and Leia Organa to pursue the sandcrawler. And when Han Solo entered the crawler, he encountered Boba Fett for the first time after the battle of the Great Pit of Carkoon. But since Fett's mind remained blank, Han was able to convince him to assist in their escape until Leia called out to Han, causing Fett's memory to return. Immediately, Boba Fett was driven to attempt to kill the man who had sent him into the Sarlacc, but just as quickly, Han Solo was able to outmaneuver the bounty hunter and flee to his land speeder, while the sandcrawler and Fett were led to the Pit of Carkoon. And in a similar way to how Boba Fett's focus on capturing Luke Skywalker led to his downfall, Fett's desire for revenge against Han Solo sent him back into the Sarlacc's grasp to face a much more horrible struggle. This was when Boba Fett's desire to survive and endure would truly be tested. After descending into the creature, Boba Fett was left unconscious, possibly from the Sarlacc's tranquilizing poisons, and was subsequently grabbed and hung on the walls of the Sarlacc's digestive tract by tendrils that encompassed the space and tightened when he moved. Hours later, in total darkness, Fett awoke from his accident and realized he was left mostly motionless, with his hands and feet being completely numb while his skin burned from the Sarlacc's stomach acid. Though eventually he would be able to see his surroundings when the Sarlacc opened its mouth during the day. In the time that he had been held against his will, Fett was surrounded by a constant dank smell, the occasional sound of some of the hundreds of tendrils whipping around him, and the invasion of his mind by the unified consciousness of the Sarlacc that was made up of the victims she had consumed. Specifically, he connected with the memories of the sentient creature known as Saseho, who was revealed to be the first victim of the Sarlacc, a Jedi who had been swallowed in the early years of the creature's life, and a Corellian gambler who had been mangled by the tentacles of the Sarlacc, who had thought about the woman he loved until he died. Though Boba Fett's mind had been damaged and distorted from his encounters with the Sarlacc thus far, these memories and the pain that he was feeling drove him forward, with a deep rage within him growing as the horrors of dying in the Sarlacc became clear. This nightmare fueled his anger and fury until his mind became so dark and pure that he was completely focused on killing the monster that tortured him. He even claimed that his rage was more powerful than the Dark Lord himself, Darth Vader. Once he was fully awake and his resolve was high, he quickly determined that he couldn't activate any of his weapons because they all required the use of his hands that were bound. His blaster rifle, wrist lasers, rocket dart launcher, and flame projector were all useless, but he knew he had to begin his escape soon because he could feel his body degrading as the stomach acid burned underneath his armor on his chest, back, arms, and legs. Thrashing himself around, he was able to be dragged down by the tendrils far enough until his right foot was against some kind of ground. After that, he took account of the status of his equipment and scanned the Sarlacc's interior with radar and sonar, and he was able to determine he was about 40 meters beneath the ground. Sure, he had no clue how he would survive in the Tatooine desert if he would be able to escape, but his primary goal needed to be to leave with his life, which is why once he got his right foot solidly against the ground, he pushed against the ground as the tentacles tightened and whipped him, allowing him to force the switch in his jetpack's emergency access panel to go down. With that action, suddenly flames erupted from the jetpack, causing the Sarlacc a massive amount of pain, which led to hundreds of tentacles whipping Boba Fett and constricting him further, causing him to be unable to breathe until his jetpack exploded due to it firing for too long in close quarters. For a moment, Fett was completely disoriented from the explosion as the jetpack's burning fuel scorched him and the Sarlacc's walls. Both of them were on fire. Only Fett didn't just have his exposed skin aflame, but every part of him that touched his metal armor was searing in pain from the scalding hot Beskar. In an attempt to continue to break free from the Sarlacc before he was burned alive, Fett sent a concussion grenade into the ceiling above his head, which tore apart the Sarlacc, but this time when Boba Fett was thrown by the explosion, he broke his left arm when it became trapped underneath him as he fell into the acid and fuel mixture beneath his feet. With that action, sand from outside of the Sarlacc poured down into the creature as Boba Fett fell into disarray as his entire body seemed to be deteriorating from the outside in from the flames and acid. He was consumed by the pain that he felt, but once he realized he was still alive, he fired another grenade into the darkness, which caused an avalanche of sand to go down upon him. Getting up out of the sand, Boba Fett almost fainted as he removed the armor that weighed him down, which had become cracked and soaked in acid, only leaving his helmet on to protect his head as he used his final grenade to create the largest hole he possibly could in the burning Sarlacc's hull. This time, the sand that poured onto him completely engulfed him and crushed him, to the point where he knew the only place he could continue to move was upward. With no air around him, Boba Fett frantically swam through the tons of sand on top of him, with his mortal terror forcing him to use his broken body to free him from the Sarlacc. And eventually, with all of his strength, he was able to break through to the surface. Through his resolve, he had dug his way out of the sand onto the edge of the Great Pit of Carkoon, and while it's possible he might have died there, eventually the infamous bounty hunter Dengar discovered Boba Fett alone in the desert and nursed him back to health. Although it would take years until he was able to fully recover from his escape, and it wasn't likely that many of his scars would ever fully heal. But again, this is just the legend that I was initially told about years ago briefly by my Uncle Mark, which completely blew my mind at the time. While I grew up kind of questionable of Boba Fett's awesomeness because of the way he ended up in the Sarlacc's pit, from this story, Boba Fett was solidified in my mind as a warrior who refused to die quietly, which was why, with his Mandalorian armor, the weapons at his disposal, and his sheer determination, he became known as the first being to ever escape a Sarlacc. Only now, through the Mandalorian, we know for sure that Boba Fett actually survived his experience, meaning that even though this event could have occurred in a completely different way from Legends, his accomplishment is still grand. Boba Fett survived one of the most torturous and terrifying creatures known to exist, which only furthers his status as one of the most legendary figures within that galaxy. Fun people, make sure to click the subscribe button and click the beautiful bell if you're new, and make sure to click on another magical video in the description or on the screen. Finally, as always, thank you to my patrons, thanks for watching, and have a magical day.